Hey, Brian, good afternoon.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Doing good.
You were just telling me that the Quail project is nearing a transition.
Should be by the next recording, we will know what our hatch rate is, and we will have hopefully a new flock of baby quails.
Very exciting.
So yeah, so that'll
We'll
be
have to
fun to
post
see.
maybe a little video in our shorts section
Yeah,
for those
yeah.
keeping score.
For those keeping score, yeah, it's kind of a fun new undertaking. So
I wanted to take our conversation in a little bit of a different direction. I mean, we've touched on this and we've touched plenty of adjacent stuff. Um, a, a very important part of the life structure, even if it doesn't exist, that's also important, is partnership. And I'm talking about intimate partnership, marriage. And I've been thinking about kind of the layers upon layers upon layers of mystery involved in in that. So like when we choose a partner, especially if we do it at a young age, but even not, like who is the I that is choosing is a big question. And the choice, I think, often has these overtones of um we're working out unconscious material through this choice, and whether the partnership is apt for that or not, um that material gets addressed somehow. And I find that interesting. Like, we might have this idea of the perfect partner, but that idea is formed by our kind of unresolved wishes to some extent. And even if we think we're really clear, the level psychologically from which we make choices is mysterious, and there's like the yin will component of that. But then there's all this mystery around uh, beyond evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology. There's um, a mythology, I guess, that we attach to partnership and marriage. Like, I guess there's all the archetypes of that, the good and the bad. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think from like a psychological and spiritual perspective, and I don't know if there's also a metaphysical perspective on this, like philosophical. Curious at um, from your current vantage point, what is the meaning of that topic?
well, it reminds me of the saying that's was attributed to Socrates, who, one of the things we know about Socrates, not only was he a ferocious hoplite warrior, but he also had a relatively infamous wife named Xantippe, who was apparently less than pleasant. And so there's a line that is attributed to him. I have no idea whether it's true or not, where he says that a man should definitely marry. And he says, if you get a good wife, you'll be happy. And if you don't, you'll become a philosopher. So
So
I'm
here we
inclined
are.
I'm inclined to just leave it at that. Goodbye, folks. We'll see you next week.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you and good night. Um, in when viewed in I like to set everything in this sort of metaphysical landscape of us relating to the outside world. And from the at least the illusion of there being a self, and the self having to relate to the world. And for those folks that caught last week's episode, you may recall me saying something that's is probably ripe to take out of context, but this idea that we go out into the world to find ourselves. And meaning that we, when I talk about the hermeneutic circle, we talk about, applying, just to briefly reprise that, it's taken from the idea of reading a book that we're trying to interpret, have an idea of the book. I read the first page. Now that alters my idea of the book a little bit. But my reading of the first page was contextualized by my idea of the book in general. Then that idea is updated by reading the first page. Then when I read the second page, now I'm reading it contextualized by the now updated version of my idea of the whole book. And back and forth, it goes like that. And the implication when we say it that way is that I'm kind of a null factor in that, right? That is that the next page or the next day that I'm interpreting is what it is. And at least that's certainly the way I tend to think of it or feel it or experience it. And then I reflect it to this model of the whole that also masquerades as not me. But when we unfold this more, we find out that when I just apprehended, before I comprehended, when I apprehended this new piece, it turns out my fingerprints were already on it somehow in the apprehension, even before the comprehension of the new piece, the parts of it that I absorbed out of the milieu, if you will, the relationships I assumed that the pieces would take on before the comprehension, just the apprehending of the thing itself. So then when I relate it to the whole, there's also that idea that my picture of the whole, my cognitive model, is somehow neutral, and that it's separate from me, and that my fingerprints aren't all over it. But in fact, of course, my fingerprints are all over it. When I was a little kid, when I would go to a town, I knew where all the karate schools were, right? Now I go to a new town, I don't pay so much attention to that, right? So, but this idea that we are involved in the parameters that we choose reality by. And so that's sort of like the world is out there and there's me, but the role of me in creating that outside world and in interpreting and apprehending and comprehending that new piece, my role sort of sits in the background and it's not real obvious. So now part of the world, part of the dimension of not me, is a component that we have referred to in past episodes, going all the way back pretty far, as the other, which is to say that, yeah, it's a part of the world, it's part of the not me, but we acknowledge through a reflectivity that it must also bear a selfhood similar to ourselves and unlike an inanimate object. So the other takes on a life, if you will, even if it's just a facsimile life within our cognitive model. So now all our interactions, positive, negative, and all the subtleties in between, with any other living, breathing, we probably could even put pets and all these things. These all become others that become mechanisms that our relationship with ourself is revealed by. In other words, we come to learn who we are in all of these matters. Interrelationship matters. We come to have a certain flavor that makes it us. Uh, William James would refer to that familiarity as a warmth, or and he makes reference to how when we sit in a chair, if somebody else has been sitting in the chair and it's warm from their having been there, it's sort of we don't open to it the same way, maybe unless it's somebody we're very close to. But if we got out of a chair and then we sat back in it, that warmth is somehow us again.
I've
It's
never thought
somehow.
about that. Yeah.
Is it curious?
Well, it's definitely true of toilet seats.
Well, then there's that. Yeah, we can push this into a
A
lot of
warm
different.
one of those is not welcome.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But then we get into the special relationships that others can have. And this is where it's interesting, because we almost now we're coming up on typologies, but we're coming on them from the other side. Before the question was, who are you? Meaning, who is the subject? And the typologies were all applied to a self. But when we start looking at the others and what are the others that are out there that I can interact with, now these others, we start referring to them as archetypes. And this is where, of course, as soon as I say the word archetype, I'm pretty sure it was Carl Jung that even came up with the term. But Jung's work, of course, leaps to mind. And often when we talk about archetypes, and I believe this is also related to Jung's work, we start thinking of the major arcana of the tarot deck. Images like the Hierophant and the Empress and the Fool and the Magus.
Yeah, or the
Uh,
pantheon of Greek gods or Roman gods or Norse gods. I mean, they all have r- relevant patterns to one another. They're not identical, but
as well as astrological houses.
exactly. Yeah.
Leo having an energy, Cancer having an energy, Capricorn having an energy, that come to take on almost personalities. But of course, the one that I'm working my way to, which is the long way into your question, is that when we talk about other in terms of intimacy, Jung's concept is around a rather special type of archetype that he would call the anima or the animus, where the nature of our dance with that otherness is mysterious, and in some ways it mirrors the mystery of the cosmos in generating the creation. And so it's no mystery that this is the union of opposites that generates more life, right? As if it isn't just, and of course, within nature, there are cases of, I know there's a name for it, parthenogenesis or where there's asexual reproduction.
Yeah. But so that's kind of what I was getting at, and it's difficult to pinpoint, but there's this kind of biological necessity, right? And in partnership is where we can look at that biological necessity alongside this story of unfolding the self and this story of the trajectory of the evolution of consciousness, um, and how our relationships with our foundational caretakers, parents usually, are part of how we're thrown into the choices that we make in that process. And I'm right now I'm finding it a little bizarre that this kind of like superficial seeming biological reproductive process um, has all of that material attached to it. It's like all the material is attached to this thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's part of the mystery of uh, pulsation, the mystery of, like, what leaps to mind for me is the sound uh, that in internal and in external martial arts, there are often movements that we go through at the beginning, and often those movements are circular somehow, right? Some kind of circling around, and you know, and often there'll be, a big movement that then comes back, right? Or if you're familiar with Sanskrit and the way they write the character Om, there's a dot there. And as I understand it, I am not a Sanskrit scholar, but as I understand it, that dot represents the sound disappearing inside you. So you have, in the sound Om, you have O, which is the reaching out, the big circular, even that's O, O, reaching out, O, almost like I ate it, right? So we get this, is it a symbol? Is it it's a sonic manifestation of an idea, and the idea would be it reaching all the way out, then turning around and coming all the way back inside. So again, we have this idea of an inside and an outside, and an utterance coming from an inside to an outside and then disappear back on the inside. Um, so the two-ness of things, okay, in Tai Chi Chuan, people hear the name Tai Chi Chuan and they hear that internal martial arts is about chi, and they think that the chi in Tai Chi Chuan is the chi that flows around in your body and that your acupuncturist tries to manipulate with his needles and herbs. They're not the same. They're both the character. They're both pronounced chi, but they're probably even different tones. I don't know for sure which tones are which, but the idea of Tai Chi is the idea that gets translated. Dai means big, right? And Chi is a limit. And so the Tai Chi, what they're referring to, and what in Taoist cosmology Tai Chi refers to, is the great limit, which is yin and yang. And this is a great limit because if we are starting with the universe and the 10,000 things, and we start working our way back to understand the origination of things through the causes and conditions, we ultimately come upon this and that duality, yin and yang. And there's no way for human consciousness to transcend duality, because for human consciousness to be conscious of something, there has to be the consciousness, and the thing it's conscious of. And so you're stuck with two. You can't get past two. Two is the limit. Yin and yang is the limit. You can't go beyond. So if folks remember our seats around the phonograph table, what the idea that I can't go beyond yin and yang is really a way of saying that though I may change seats at the table, I really can't get up from the table and see from the top. I can deduce that there's a place up there, but my butt's kind of glued in the chair because here and there, yin and yang really is the great limit.
On on a particular question.
And I think cosmologically, metaphysically,
But we can
and
level up
that's
our thinking literally as it relates to a phonograph, right? So can you be more precise about which question we are on which question our butt is actually glued to the seat? Like the nature of reality? Is that kind of like the
yeah, that
right.
that as a human being with a here and a now, as a Dasein, right? As a being in a place, in a time, with a foot having been nailed down somewhere, the nature of our seeing is limited by dimension. And for us to get beyond that, to transcend that dimensionality, is by definition, a mystical state. And whether those can happen or not, different people will argue from different points of view. But, we're sniffing around territory here that's very controversial nowadays, it turns out. And the reason is because we've kind of just slid across this distinction between is and ought. When we're in the world of is, we can talk about zygotes. When we get into the world of oughts, it starts to look like things like
Archetype.
daddy should daddy should go to work and mommy should put on an apron and wash the dishes.
Maybe that's what I meant by this topic kind of has all the stuff built in, and there's this um objective and subjective adjacency that's it's I don't think it's unique. I think that tension shows up elsewhere. Maybe in
Well, we've been here before, right? This is familiar territory. We're back at the mind body problem.
Mhm.
If it's all mind, then well, it's great. Then just change your mind. But if it's all body, then well, I suppose that's the theory is that you can just change the body.
Well,
Uh,
it's current
if
thinking.
if it's a mysterious blend of embodied mind or mind at which gets called variously panpsychism, epiphenomenalism, that somehow the one results in the other or the other results in the one in a gooey way, folks will recognize the goo as a philosophical issue now, not just a fun reference. Um, the uh, well, we get into that issue that David Hume referred to as, there's the world of is and the world of ought. And we sort of need to be philosophically aware when we're operating in one realm, when we're operating in the other, and when we're in that gooey zone, so that we give. It's like we said, the impulse is to hit the guardrail on the one side or to hit the guardrail on the other side. For those of us, or for those folks who want a more in-depth explanation of this guardrail and materialism and idealism, this was a part of the conversation that we had with Dr. Stephen Hicks in that episode. But the tendency is to want to hit one guardrail or the other guardrail, as opposed to finding a skillful means to make it down that highway somewhere in the center, even if we're zigzagging across the line, avoiding armadillos and
and other metaphors.
Well, it's rare that there's anything really in the middle of the road nowadays, I think.
Huh.
Oblique reference to Jim Hightower's book. The only thing in the middle of the road is white lines and dead armadillos.
Okay.
Talk about polarized political times, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Um, but so so yeah, I mean, this is a part of also, I guess, a question of our identity too. We can turn this inside phenomenologically, and it turns into how much am I who I am, and how much am I who I make myself to be. And I suppose there's ways of being optimistic and pessimistic and occupying either camp. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was kind of pointing at with Yin Will, but that's a good way of putting it. Um, who is the I that is choosing this partnership? And and I do believe that at this stage in my life, that regardless of how much work we do to kind of surface unconscious material and integrate it, the I that is choosing is still quite mysterious.
sure, and that stuff bubbles up under its own timing and with its own steam.
Implying an unseen hand, even.
Maybe it's the unseen hand.
Yeah, that's the one I meant.
Yeah, big, many fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, where there's there's an element of fate, like which is externalized, unconscious, unintegrated material.
fate. You said, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, with sometimes a kind of a moth to the flame kind of a quality to it, right? So, and this is maybe one of the most nuanced ways in which we are actually asking the universe, who are we? And that is by this question, what do we want? What do we think is possible for us to actually have in reality? How well adapted are our hopes and dreams? How realistic are our goals, right? Uh, and all of that is sort of based on who we feel ourselves to be today. Because remember, there's not a state of identity, but of exact equality. This is more William James, right? I can't actually ever be in the same state of mind that I've ever been in before. So this idea that, oh, I'm gonna have the experience that I had back when I was da 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 da, that can't ever happen because, and this is in his section on attention, what our awareness of the moment is always our awareness of past moments brought forth with the new moment sort of stacked on top of it. That there is a continuity that's related to the continuity that we call I. And so yeah, there is this idea of who we are, but then, if we've been an I very long, we come to the experience or the understanding that we don't always know who we are in every respect. And a good part of a life that develops our character reveals who we are and also reveals our potential and a pathway to fulfilling that potential. Right. So So we have to be kind of careful about with this self-image idea. And because it's a leverage point, it's a pivot point, and it's my impulse is to say it's something that we want to that we need to manage, right? We know that this is one of another topic maybe for Aristotle's doctrine of the mean, because we know that there is a position of overconfidence in the self. We know that there is a condition of lack of confidence in the self. And we know that the sweet spot is when that kind of works out as in good balance. And it seems that there is an idea, to touch back to your original question, that one of the ways that we balance our concern with ourself is through our concern with and about others. And, which does kind of touch on one of the themes that I've been sort of musing about during the week. I didn't know that it would be maybe a full topic, but it's the myth of the Fisher King. Are you familiar with the Fisher King?
I'm familiar with the movie The Fisher King, which I'm guessing is a adaptation of the myth. It was actually filmed at my high school. That movie with
Oh, okay.
Robin Williams. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not the original one. The original one actually is the story from the time of King Arthur. And the Fisher King was a king, uh, what's the word? Contemporary with Arthur. And his kingdom was a place called the Wasteland. And
Speaking of archetypes,
he was the king, King Pellam, Pellam, King Pellam. And the thing about King Pellam, the way the story goes, is that King Pellam was wounded with the spear of Longinus, which those schooled in the Arthurian legends will recognize as the spear of destiny, the spear that supposedly killed Jesus Christ on the cross. And so the thing that happens is he's wounded alternately. There's a few different versions of this story, but he's wounded alternately in the leg or in the groin, which is, of course, to imply that his generative capacities have been injured. And as a result, his kingdom is the wasteland. With his inability to bring forth, so does the land lose its ability to bring forth. Which, is interesting. Nowadays, we don't get the way that people used to in olden times. We don't understand how our fruitfulness, to refer to a previous episode, how much our fruitfulness depends on the fruits of nature. And because we've kind of tried to game that system to such a degree, but like for me, for example, it's very evident to me from my fruit trees that not all years are the same. Not all years produce the same amount of fruit, and a lot of years don't produce any fruit here in my situation. But so this idea of fruitfulness is more than just how you've gamed the system. For a long time, it was connected to more dimensional, nuanced aspects of how humans inhabited things. We go back to some of the early Chinese emperors, and they would do a ritual plowing, and it very much had to do with keeping heaven on the good side so that, nature unfolded in a way that was fruitful to humans. But anyway, so back to the Fisher King, he's messed up, and so goes the empire the same way. And what happens is a character shows up. Well, this gets tangled up with the story of the Holy Grail. This is an early Christian myth, right? So the Knights of the Round Table have gone out to seek the Holy Grail. And it turns out that the Holy Grail is and what is the deal with it? But basically the Fisher King, he's got it. And he's got a special place, I believe, where the Grail's kept. That part escapes me now, but so there are various stories. In one of the stories, it's Percival. In one of the other stories, it's Galahad, who come across, in their search for the Holy Grail, they come across the castle of King Pellam. And they see what the situation is. And both of them are really young, or whichever one it was is really, really young. And he's described as a young fool. And when he's in the presence of King Pellam, he kind of gets that something's not right here. But he's young. He doesn't really entirely know his place. He doesn't want to be presumptuous. He doesn't want to breach decorum. So he just basically keeps his mouth shut and ends up going on his way, no wiser, with nothing having been solved. So then he goes off, has adventures, continues his quest, in the process of which he becomes a knight, a real knight. And I don't remember the mechanism whereby he shows back up on King Pellam, but now he is his own person. He's no longer just an empty head. And now he knows, or he's moved and does not worry about himself. He's moved to ask the Fisher King a question. Now, the Fisher King is called the Fisher King because apparently spends all of his time out in a boat fishing. And there are parallels there to Jesus being, making the disciples fishers of men. And so there's some allusion there. But the idea is he's waiting to be healed. So now when whoever it was, Galahad or Percival, when they come back and now they have become their official person, they've lost their innocence, they're now who they are. They ask the question, and there's two versions of the question in the various stories. One of the versions of the question is, whom does the Grail serve? And the other version of the question is, what ails you? And what's interesting about this tale is that it is the asking of the question that turns the lock in the key and begins the resurrection, if you will, of the Fisher King.
Huh.
And one of the interesting implications of this, and one of the reasons I was thinking about it, was I was thinking about it, of course, in terms of dialogue, but also in terms of Levinas, whom we've spoken of before in our episodes with the tutor, Professor Claudia Hauer. If you go back in our guest episodes, we'll talk about the idea of a new ethics. Well, this idea that sort of is the foundation of this new ethics, is that the encountering of what Emmanuel Levinas calls the face of the other, we are faced with a moral obligation that's represented by that other. And so the question, whom does the Grail serve? Or what ails you, sort of represents the knight, the one who has been lifted from their state of innocence and now has developed all these virtues through encountering the world, is now in a position to not be worried about himself and whether he's going to say the right thing or that. He's actually in a position to put his attention on the other. So in the language of Levinas, they might say he has stopped totalizing everything according to the standards in his own head, like he did when he was the young fool, and now has actually created an opening through which the other can enter, if you will. And so that turns the whole game around. Now the wasteland is fertile again. Now the king comes back to health. Now everything is once again chingon.
I don't think I understand the juxtaposition of the two questions. So, whom does the Grail serve, and what ails you? That's like in a. I was expecting like some yin and yang, but that's more oblique than that.
Well, I think that the connecting thing is the focusing away from the self and the focusing on the other, and that it represents a dispositional shift. And that in that way, the both questions represent the same dispositional shift.
Got it.
And that, this is part of the mystery of dialogue, and or what Levinas would say is it's within the potential of dialogue for there to be the meeting of two infinities. So if old traditional, going back to Descartes, there was this idea that divinity and infinity bear a very close relationship. That one of the dimensions of divinity that humanity can't plumb is infinitude. So there is this idea also, as we've mentioned before, with what is called the Coast of Norway problem, that any specific, particularly any specific as complicated as a human, represents an infinity of sorts. And so this lives very close to this idea that every human life has a certain element of divinity. And at that point, if dialogue that's based on this non-totalizing, that is, dialogue that's based on an openness to the other, is actually a way for this infinity to mine out novelty, for new understanding to arise because of this representing maybe one of the best ways to change seats at the table. Maybe not go into the extra dimension, but it's through changing seats on the table that we deduce the reality of floating above the table, if you will.
I see.
Yeah. So anyway, there's something going on with that, and it's a kind of an old idea. It's definitely a Christian idea, right? And remember, there is this idea that Jesus Christ died for everyone's sins, which is, in some respect, the ultimate opening to the other, the ultimate taking on of the otherness, right? If I'm only for me, who am I? Right? well, if I'm going to be seen as a manifestation of God, I better be for everybody. There's another way. if there's a kind of a logical
But
language there to,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
So this
so
hasn't been specifically about romantic involvement, except in the most general way,
yeah,
that it has to do with how I see myself in not only in relationship to myself, but in relationship to the world at large and to the world of others. What are my realistic expectations in regard to those relationships? Um, and with the caveat that all of the people here are, Heidegger wanted to say a human is a Dasein because the nature of a being is that it exists in a here and a now, but that it also has this impulse to care about questions like what is being and what does it mean to be and whether, right? So there's all of this that rides in with the other and with understanding what it is to be ourself. And so uh it's interesting and worth self-reflection on the way that that is involved with and tangled up with other people. Um, I think that's one of the reasons a lot of monastic traditions uh, try to clear that out in the interest, perhaps, of making a space for the individual to generate some type of clarity. Um, Not that there aren't traditions that involve that, but uh, it almost seems as if there's a place to start is with a certain degree of self knowledge, uh, although it will always be insufficient,
yeah. Turns
right?
out,
Because there is the self revealing process of the interaction with the world. And that's why I guess what my point was is that these are all moving qualities. When I say I, yes, there is a sameness, but there's also not a certain non sameness. I'm not even really who I was when I woke up this morning, right? Already there, maybe at that point, the subtleties are too small to track, but between now and when I was 20, they're certainly obvious and impossible to ignore. So even though there's an incrementalness there is definitely a becoming as opposed to a immutable being.
maybe that's a good segue to maybe a final question or framing. Um, I guess I have a far too simplistic mental model that good marriage is something like an opportunity for mutual unfolding, and bad marriage is more or less an opportunity for reenactment of the trauma that put us all in whatever situation we're in. Kind of endless recapitulation of that.
Which is
Um,
also a strategy for unfolding.
well, it could
It's
be.
just a messier one.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, I mean, maybe that's the extent of your reaction to that model, but maybe you have more, or kind of an image of what what we're looking for real, and w- is there a spectrum to that? Maybe it's not a that's not a big enough question, but maybe that's a way at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the odds are that what we're looking for real is very likely, and the more likely the younger we are, is something that is not real, which makes a bit of a conundrum. Um, and we come to realizations around what is real through that process of pursuing what we think is real. And so, there are times when there's no ball on the pachinko machine of souls that makes it to the bottom without hitting some things on the way. That's sort of in the design. And it hits, it goes left, it hits, it goes right. That there's no telling. And this is one of the things where I think that sort of applies. And for me, I think the big realizations that I have had around that in particular have to do with just the inescapability of that mechanism. I certainly don't feel that I've been able to escape it. And the argument could be made that I started with maybe a pretty stacked deck that would make relationship with the other in that way a little trickier maybe than for many.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
So maybe that is a possible thing. Just doesn't seem likely to be possible for everyone, and maybe not for most. Um, so, I mean, the hardest thing is probably for us to come to the ability to be realistic about these types of things and to have realistic expectations, and and uh, and that's really hard, I think, because of the way culture pumps it up. You know, of course, your romance should look like your movie star idol's world or whatever nonsense. There was a time, uh, a chapter or two in my life where I was exposed to a lot of Spanish novellas from South America. All right. And a lot rides in on what seemed to be passive pictures of how life works and who you want to be in the midst of all that. And we get downloads from a lot of directions.
I would say those are also manifestations of kind of archetypal patterns, right? They're idealized, but that doesn't mean they're not also archetypal.
Yeah, and by archetypal, they can still be pretty idiospecific. That is to one particular culture or milieu
Sure.
within a culture. Uh, the messages you're going to get, for example, growing up as a kid in California compared to growing up in Iowa are probably still going to be pretty different, even though we're highly mediated. Um, uh, so, yeah, I mean, uh, there's a lot of subtlety. One of Alan Watts's books was called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Really Are. One of the big things that Heidegger identified was this idea that he called Das Mann, the man, right? He was writing in the 60s. But the man was the thing that told you, it was society telling you what you should think and how you should behave and what was cool and what kind of jeans you should wear this season and all of that. And then we have, of course, the famous allusion to that is, I think I've made reference to him before. Uh, uh, what's his name? With the bed, Procrustes. Procrustes was a villain, right? That would make the people he captured sleeping in the Procrustean bed, which would either shrink them or rather stretch them to a certain standard length, which apparently was unpleasant, or chop off the extra length if they were too tall, so that everybody was going to be the same. That became known as the Procrustean bed. And so that's also, another picture of the effect of Dasman, or the taboo against knowing who you really are. And, we get told a lot, you can be anybody you want to be. And I think the reality isn't true, is that isn't true. And I don't think you want to be anybody that you want to be. I think you want to be
It's actually a
you.
problem. Yeah, to pursue the ends of that belief system.
Yeah, I think you want to be you. And I think that's where you have to be looking for the amazing stuff, not for the outside, where, uh, uh, the expectations can rapidly. What was I looking at? Well, it's probably not even worth going into. But it was just this idea of the aspirations that people have around marriage, and I think the original conversation that brought it up was around marrying into a royal family.
Hmm.
And what's the difference? But what part is marrying somebody, and what part is relations to royal family, which is just a specific
Right. It's the
version.
same. It's the same as any. Uh, uh, and I think it's unique to the relationship of intimate partnership. The totality of context that becomes part of that relationship. There are other
Yep.
close relationships, best friends and mentor mentee and things like that. And context comes in with it, but not to that extent. Um,
And you're not as vulnerable to those influences to that extent as you are within that one, which is what makes it the Capulets and the Montagues, right? They had heavy thumbs on the scale of the relationship between, of course, Romeo and Juliet, as the family names I'm referring to. So they were not free from the familial relations that rode in with that, you know. And so yeah, there's definitely a lot complicating matters.
yeah,
And then there's the whole topic of how rapidly these issues are changing in our time. Just from the time, excuse me, when I was young to now, sensibilities around these things are very different.
hmm
Um, you know, when I was young, for example, most of my friends' moms didn't work
hmm
unless they were nurses or teachers.
yeah,
And now, of course, there's not. I mean, if most moms didn't work, their households would be in poverty. Uh, so yeah, things have changed, and there is definitely this speeding up of some forms of novelty. That's why it's interesting to see as these different institutions are exposed to varying cultural pressures, how they morph, how they warp, which ones don't change, which ones maybe begin to buckle and then reassert. But it's interesting. It's definitely we've never seen it the way that we're seeing it today. So that's some interesting questions.
yeah.
Um,
Well, maybe let's hit pause there and bring some of those questions back around. It was interesting. This didn't go in the directions that I sort of anticipated as I spontaneously brought this up. I mean, it's not like I had, um, but there's some interesting stuff there. I'm going to look forward to listening back. Um, Thank you.
yeah, we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye, Brian.
Have a good one.